Have you ever stopped to think that the gold that built the greatest empire in history was also responsible for its downfall? That's right. The golden gleam that financed invincible legions and glorious conquest campaigns was, at the same time, the burden that dragged Rome to its collapse. While the world marveled at the splendor of the gleaming coins and the luxury of the Roman elites, a dark secret was hidden deep within the gold and silver mines scattered across the empire. Behind every minted piece, there was an unimaginable human cost. Lives consumed by brutal exploitation, blood spilled at the borders, and political intrigue that destroyed reputations. Imagine the contrast. On one side, generals adorned with gold, leading armies in pursuit of glory. On the other, humble men buried in the bowels of the earth, pulling gold from the ground to feed an insatiable war machine. And while the gold gleamed in the squares of Rome, the true cost was paid on the battlefields and in the corridors of power. But what would have happened if this gold had never been discovered? Would Rome have been so powerful? Or would the empire have fallen even earlier? Today, you'll discover how the gold rush shaped Rome's destiny, from its rise as a superpower to its fall amidst corruption and chaos. We'll explore the gold mines of Hispania, where Rome's economic empire began, the military campaigns financed with silver and blood, and the human dramas, where the gleam of gold was overshadowed by greed and destruction. Get ready to understand how precious metals not only supported Rome, but also paved the way for its ruin. And before we dive in, be sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any details of these fascinating stories about the Roman Empire. And if you enjoy learning about how Rome changed the world, leave a like. It helps YouTube share this content with more people and allows us to keep making amazing videos every day. Let's dive into Rome's history like never before. From the very first steps in the conquest of Hispania, Rome saw more than just land to dominate. It saw an endless source of metal wealth. Regions like Las Medulas, with its gold and silver deposits, became key pieces in the empire's expansion strategy. These metals not only strengthened the economy, but also symbolized Rome's glory, with coins circulating throughout the known world. The exploitation of these resources was marked by technical ingenuity and brutality. To maximize production, the Romans built artificial aqueducts that diverted entire rivers to mine hydraulically, a technique that turned mountains into dust in search of hidden treasures. However, mining wasn't just a spectacle of engineering. It was also a portrait of inequality. Slaves and free workers were recruited, often by force, to dig dangerous tunnels where the dense, humid air corroded their health. The poor conditions led to diseases and frequent collapses, claiming lives in exchange for the gold that gleamed in the palaces of Rome. The promise of wealth fueled the conquest dreams of the Roman elite, but for those underground, it was merely an endless nightmare. Human labor was drained to fuel the empire's insatiable expansion machine. Meanwhile, mining brought radical changes to the conquered regions. Hispania, for example, went from a land dominated by local tribes to one of the empire's largest economic centers. Cities near the mines flourished, but their prosperity was accompanied by increased exploitation and militarization. Troops were often sent to protect shipments of precious metals as they made their way to Rome along dangerous routes. This connection between economic exploitation and military control only deepened Rome's reliance on its metal resources. It wasn't just about accumulating gold. It was about securing the future of the empire. The gold extracted from the mines financed territorial acquisitions, fortified cities, and fueled military power. In Las Medulas, the environment ravaged by mining symbolized what Rome was willing to sacrifice to maintain its hegemony. However, behind all this power were also the seeds of internal disputes and unchecked ambitions, which would be widely explored in the coming chapters. As the gold filled Rome's coffers, it also began to play a crucial role in maintaining the army. This link between wealth and military power will be the focus of the next chapter, where we'll explore how the precious metal, once an economic conquest, turned into a strategic weapon for the empire at the height of its expansion. When thinking about the military power of Rome, it's impossible to separate it from the wealth that fueled its legions. The gold and silver extracted from the conquered mines weren't just economic resources. They were the fuel for the Roman war machine. Each minted coin represented not only wealth, but the payment of troops, the construction of fortifications, and the financing of military campaigns. During the conquest of Britain, for example, the silver from Dacia was essential to keep the troops motivated and equipped. Without these riches, Roman conquests would have been limited, and the empire might not have reached its peak glory. Rome's legions, famous for their discipline and efficiency, were directly dependent on metal resources for their survival and loyalty. Regular payment in silver coins not only reinforced the soldiers' trust in the empire, but also ensured their dedication in battles that often seemed impossible to win. However, while the soldiers received modest pay, generals and senators accumulated unimaginable wealth, creating a chasm between the men on the battlefield and those who commanded from afar. This contrast generated latent tensions, which were felt both in the ranks and in the corridors of power in Rome. The relationship between gold and war also went beyond just paying the troops. The precious metal financed the construction of roads that allowed for the rapid movement of legions, aqueducts that supplied cities, and fortresses that defended the empire's borders. Every military investment made with metals extracted from the mines expanded Rome's reach, consolidating its dominion over distant territories. However, the same wealth that strengthened the army also attracted enemies, who saw Roman gold as an opportunity to destabilize the empire. The conquest of Britain is an emblematic example of how financial resources shaped military strategies. The campaign was marked by massive investments in maritime transport, provisions, and weaponry, all sustained by the silver and gold flowing from the provinces. Each victory in the field, in turn, brought new riches to the empire, creating a cycle of expansion and exploitation. However, this model became increasingly unsustainable as Roman administration faced corruption and internal disputes. As we dive deeper into the impact of gold on Rome, we begin to see how it not only fueled the empire, but also corroded its foundations. In the next chapters, we will explore how this wealth, once a symbol of power, became a catalyst for corruption, unchecked ambition, and intrigues that rocked the political structures of Rome. The wealth that once sustained the military power and glory of Rome soon turned into a poison that eroded its internal stability. Gold, more than just an economic tool, became the currency of political ambitions. Provincial governors often diverted significant portions of local wealth to enrich their families or fund political campaigns in Rome. This cycle of corruption undermined the trust of the population, who began to see gold as a symbol of oppression, not prosperity. In the late Republic, figures like Verres, the governor of Sicily, personified this administrative rot, diverting entire treasures to sustain his luxurious life and network of influence. Meanwhile, the Senate, originally the guardian of the Republic's interests, became a stage for conspiracies fueled by gold. Ambitious senators used diverted resources to buy votes, finance private armies, and manipulate political decisions. This practice contributed to a wave of instability that would culminate in civil wars. The rise of Julius Caesar, who consolidated individual power over the Republican institutions, was financed by plundering regions like Gaul. The looted gold not only funded his military campaigns, but also bought the loyalty of political and military allies, securing his control over Rome. The impact of gold went beyond political intrigue. It also shaped social behavior. In Rome, the display of wealth became a symbol of power, and unchecked luxury accentuated the inequalities. Residences adorned with gold, extravagant banquets, and priceless jewelry fueled a culture of excess that further distanced the elite from the masses. This ostentation, however, wasn't just a status display. It was also a strategy to intimidate rivals and strengthen alliances. Over time, the pursuit of gold stopped being just an economic necessity and became a cultural obsession. Corruption, however, wasn't confined to the elites. Merchants and bankers also played the game, diverting precious metals through fraudulent operations that destabilized the economy. Amidst this, the provinces suffered from rampant exploitation. where local wealth was drained without returning any benefit to the population. Tensions grew, and rebellions began to break out in various regions. The same wealth that fueled Rome's splendor also sowed resentment that would eventually turn against the empire. As greed eroded the republic, gold began to reveal its more dangerous side. Dependence on unchecked exploitation and the abuse of power created a fragile foundation for the empire. In the next chapter, we will see how these structural problems worsened, leading to economic decline and the disintegration of what was once the world's greatest empire. Gold, which once served as the foundation of Roman power, became an unsustainable burden in the final centuries of the empire. As the richest mines were exhausted, Rome faced increasing difficulties in keeping its economy running. To compensate, the emperors began debasing the currency, mixing inferior metals with gold and silver. This process, known as monetary inflation, devastated the Roman economy, eroding confidence in the financial system. Coins that once symbolized power became virtually worthless, and the trade that sustained the empire's cities collapsed. In the provinces, the impact of this crisis was even more devastating. Farmers, merchants, and soldiers faced a reality of delayed payments and unbearable taxes. Many abandoned their lands, fleeing to regions less controlled by the empire or joining barbarian invaders who offered better conditions. The economic chaos caused by currency devaluation also weakened Rome's defenses, as the legions could not be sustained without reliable resources. The gold that once fueled military conquests was no longer enough to defend the borders against peoples like the Goths and the Huns. Meanwhile, Roman cities began to reflect the empire's decline. Palaces that once gleamed with gold began to deteriorate. Markets that were once full of goods now stood empty, and grand monuments became symbols of a glorious past that could no longer be sustained. Hunger and despair became common, especially in the regions hardest hit by wars and administrative corruption. The population, once proud of its Roman heritage, began to question the empire's ability to protect and prosper. The signs of collapse were not only economic, but also social. Internal rebellions, mass desertions, and a loss of trust in the institutions eroded the fabric that held Rome together. In a vicious cycle, the lack of gold to pay the troops led to more military defeats, which in turn resulted in further territorial losses and resource depletion. The empire, once built on the gleam of gold, seemed to sink under the weight of its contradictions. Rome's economic decline, driven by the exhaustion of its mines and rampant corruption, is a lesson about the limits of power based solely on the exploitation of resources. This narrative makes us reflect on how the foundations of an empire can become the very catalysts for its ruin. Now that you've seen how the gold that sustained the Roman Empire became an unsustainable burden, imagine the moments of crisis when Rome's fate could have changed forever. If you're interested in the impact of choices during times of decline, don't miss the story of Germanicus, the general who saved Rome in one of the greatest legion's mutinies. Discover how he chose the stability of the empire over the temptation of personal power and secured Rome's future. Click here to see how this decision transformed his story and Rome's.